We've got some folks painting along.
Oh yeah, we have a few people who will be painting already, setting up. So you can see my setup here. Yeah, we can talk about that for now. So I'll show you guys how I usually do it while we wait for the time to come around. I have a drafting table. I covered it with, this is like silicone mat that I got. It's for kids, but it works perfectly. You can wash it, and it wasn't super expensive. So I got the biggest one I could find to cover my table, and I have just a white sheet of paper underneath it. And I'm right-handed, so I have my painting in front of me, and I have my palette on the right-hand side, and I keep my water behind the palette on the side here, and I have my brushes right here and my pencil and stuff. And I have an iPad here on the stand. You can see it, but it's right here with the reference photo, so I can look at it. And the reason I think it's important where you keep your water, because you don't want to have it, like if you have it in front, you will wash your brush and the splatters, there's a chance that they will fly onto the paper. And also you don't want to have it like on the other side or something. So you don't want to carry your brush over your painting. So that's the reason I have it set up here. Takes a little bit of room, but I think watercolor, I think you just have to paint on the table, so you need to have some sort of a flat surface to work on. And also I have a little foam core board that I got in the construction materials store. This is actually used for walls in the bathrooms, but it's perfect for sticking pins in. So I put my watercolor paper on the board, and then I just put something like some rolls of artist tape or something underneath to give it a little bit of an angle. I get that question sometimes. I do paint at an angle. You don't need a big angle. Maybe, I don't know, 15-20 degrees. That helps the water to slide, and it also helps you to see, because if this is flat and I'm looking at it at an angle, you get a little bit of distortion, right? So you want the paper to be more or less parallel to your eyes. So another 5 minutes and we'll start the broadcast.
Hey, Diane, this is Diane. I'm over here working the technology. So if anything messes up, it's my fault.
Yeah. Diane is the producer of the show. So she's at the controls. So you guys all figured out comments already, I can see. So just say hi, say where you are, what time it is in your time zone, if you're painting or not, what your plans are today, and we'll get started in just a few minutes.
We've got them from all over the world. Bolivia, Romania.
Oh my goodness.
Canada.
That's fabulous.
Hungary. Oh, Budapest. I love Budapest.
Yeah, I've been there too. It's beautiful. Oh. So we have an international community. That's just amazing. Watercolor brings people together. That's amazing. So the Facebook automatically records the broadcast, and also we are recording here in-house as well. I will post the recording on my YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and search Ksenia Anis, I'm sure you will find me. It's called Learn to Paint with Ksenia Anis, my channel, and Diane will post it on her channel as well. So Diane Zimmerman.
Lots of ways to see it.
Right, so everybody will have a chance to see the recording, and you can, slow it down on YouTube, watch it a few times, pause it, whatever you need to do. So don't worry about not catching something, or if your question kind of gets lost in the shuffle, because we have a lot of people joining. You can leave a comment on YouTube or leave us a comment after the broadcast, and we'll make sure and try to answer. Also, I had a question about closed captioning this broadcast. Unfortunately, Facebook does not provide closed captioning. You have to do it yourself somehow, and we just don't have the technology, unfortunately, to provide that. But YouTube has automatic closed captioning. So if you rewatch the broadcast on YouTube, you can turn on the closed captioning. There's a button in the upper right corner, and you can have it closed captioned if you need that. Alrighty. I'm excited about today. I love loose style watercolor. It's I think if you understand how it works, you know, the principle of things, it's not that hard to do. It does require a bit of patience. We were talking with Diane, you know, we don't like waiting for stuff to dry, but with watercolor you just have to, and there are different ways to do it. You can just walk away from it, do something else, or you can have couple paintings going at the same time. One is drying, and I will be painting live today. So I will need some drying time. We will all need drying time, and I will try to give everybody time to dry their painting. I will be talking about our further steps, so we will set the painting aside. But if yours is not dry by the time we continue, like I said, there will be a recording, so you can rewatch it and then continue working on it after the broadcast.
And for those painting along, and for those who are going to paint it later, please post it in the Facebook group, because I'd love to see them. I'm not going to be able to paint while we do this because I'm having to figure all this stuff out over here, but I'm anxious to see everybody's, and I will be doing mine later because I love the flower. It's so beautiful. The color is just gorgeous.
Yeah, this photo I took in Bayou Bend Gardens here in Houston, in Texas. We have, I think it's a 15-acre estate, and they have a lot of azaleas, camellias, they have some magnolia trees there. So really beautiful, peaceful place. And I make sure and go there every March or like early April. That's when everything blooms here in Houston. Sometimes even end of February, it's already warm and things start to bloom. So I went and took that photo, and Diane, I saw, gave it, she was talking about taking photos in portrait mode on your phone. That's what I did, and it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
So it creates a focal point and everything else is soft. And I thought this will be perfect for loose watercolor. So this is a local camellia, local Houston camellia.
Okay, it's 11.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so we can get started. So once again, welcome everybody. Welcome to Tammy Rub Studio. Welcome to today's free live event. We're hoping to have those regularly in Watercolor Beginners and Beyond group. I know Diane is working on inviting other artists to participate as well, to provide maximum information and value to all the group members. My name is Ksenia. I'm a water media artist and teacher here in Houston, Texas. I teach artists to paint with water media in general, and in particular with watercolor. You can find me online. My online school is called Learn to Paint with Ksenia. I have on-demand classes on my website, kseniaanis.com. All the links you see right here, the link to my website. And also on social media, I'm Tammy Rub Studio. So that's the name of my studio, and I use it on social media. And also YouTube channel is youtube.com/c/Tammy Rub Studio. We also set up a little tip jar for this event. You see the link right here. It's totally not required, but if you feel like you got some value out of this event, some extra knowledge, some extra inspiration, we will definitely appreciate some tips. You know, they help set up the cost of art materials, and Diane spends a lot of time and her own resources on this group. So if you feel like you can donate a little bit, it will be greatly appreciated. All right, so let's talk about what we will be doing today. Today's topic is loose watercolor. So first we need to understand what it is, right? So what do we understand as loose watercolor? Loose style watercolor, people call it differently. I chose this photo as an example, but we can paint anything in that style, right? It can be landscape, it can be animals, it can be even portraits can be in loose style. And the way I understand it is that when we paint in a loose style, we let go of some of the control of watercolor and we allow it to kind of float on paper, mix, and do its thing. And that's for me what brings out the best qualities of watercolor. That texture that watercolor creates on watercolor paper, those colors, how they mix and how they interact with each other. That's the beauty of watercolor. That's why we're doing it, right? It's not the easiest medium in the world to work with, but that transparency and that texture is why we're attracted to it. So that's why we want to master this technique. And I know a lot of people say they find it very difficult and it just doesn't work for them. But I think if you understand the principle of it and the building blocks of loose watercolor, you will be able to do it. It's not, some magic. It's just a technique that you need to understand. And today we will make a first, stab at it because it obviously requires times and patience and some practice. But today we will talk about the building blocks of loose watercolor, and the building blocks are brush strokes. That's why I told everybody to take a look at that ebook that I created specifically about brush strokes, the brush stroke guide on my website, because, if you understand the steps, you will be able to do it. So that's the plan. And tell us in comments what you understand as loose watercolor, because everybody has their own kind of vision and, understanding. So I just wonder if you agree with me or you think, it's something different. You have a different approach to loose watercolor. Okay, so let's talk about the first brush stroke that we will need. I forgot to tell you guys in art supply material, in the materials list, if you have a piece of scrap watercolor paper, or just grab something, you can paint on the other side of an old painting or something. So let's just grab a little piece of watercolor paper, just a small one that you don't need, and I want to show you the first brush stroke that we'll be working with. When we talk about looseness, right, letting go of the control, when does that happen? It happens when we paint on wet surface. The first rule of watercolor is that paint goes where the water is. It's very important to remember. That's why we mess up when we don't let our painting dry. That's why, sometimes the colors don't quite look the same, because watercolor does its own thing and it goes where it's wet. But we can also use it to our advantage, right? And create that unique look that watercolor is so valued for. So if we wet the surface with just clean water, and it's important, that's why I always have 2 water containers, because I wash my brush in one and I have clean water in the other one. You will never get clean, brilliant colors if you're adding muddy water to your painting, right, that you washed your brush in. So clean water, and take a pigment, any pigment, and we drop it into that water. And you can see that my brush strokes, they kind of float into the water. They don't have a defined edge, and that creates that watercolor texture. So this technique is called painting wet on wet, when we wet paper first and then we drop water in there. And let me show you, this is the dry surface. If I do the same thing on the dry surface, this will look completely different. First of all, this is a lot brighter, this is a lot softer, and these brush strokes all blended together, but these ones I can keep separate if I need to, and the paint doesn't move. So watercolor will go where water is, and you need to know if your paper is wet or your paper is dry. And we will talk about it in just a second. And when we paint wet on wet, we can start with clean water and apply paint to it. And another thing we can do is drop paint into painted surface before it dries. So if I pick up another color and I drop it in to the wet surface, you can see even better what happens. The paint floats and goes where the water is. And if I add, I can drop a different color. I can drop yellow again in it. I can drop some green. And all these colors are starting to run and mix. And this is what we call letting go of control. To some extent, because I will talk about it in a second. Watercolor, yes, it's loose and we want it to do what it does, but we need to understand the implications, right? So the colors will mix. So if you mix complementary colors that are opposites on the color wheel, that are, on the opposite sides, what are you going to get? You're going to get a neutral color. So it will be brown or gray or black. Do you want this in your painting? If you do, that's great. But if you don't, then you're in trouble. Also, do you need to show a shape that has defined edges in the plane? What's your goal in the painting? Do you want defined edges? If you paint on a wet surface, you're not going to get defined edges. You can see it. The color spreads even now more and more. And the edges are very soft. They're undefined. So do you want that or you don't? So that's all kind of the building blocks of the painting. And you need to understand them and make them work to your advantage. All right, so these are our first brush strokes. We will start our painting wet on wet. And why are we going to do this? Let me go to my reference photo. So let's analyze our reference photo. I think everybody has it, right? If you don't, it was posted in the group, so you can find it. Are we getting glare? I don't think so. Right, let me put this on here so everybody can see without the lights blinding them. Okay, so here is our reference photo. So what do we see when we look at this photo? We have camellia flower with some leaves, and they're close to us. So our main subject, right, of this painting is this camellia flower. And we wanted to attract the viewer's attention, and that's what our painting is about, right? It can be a flower, or it can be something more complex. It can be a person or an animal or a view, a landscape. Every single painting requires to have a focal point, even if it's an abstract. And what does that achieve? It's two things. So the first thing is that it tells the viewer what the painting is about. I've heard it many times. Artists, experienced artists would tell me, you need to guide the viewer's eye. And I was like, how can I guide the viewer's eye? I can't stand there and tell them what to look at. But that's how we do it. We create a focal point. That's where the person looks first. And it tells them what the painting is about. And then they see everything else around it. And that if there is something interesting going on around the focal point, they will keep looking at your painting. And if there's nothing going on, they will move on. And the second thing that we want to create in the painting, we're trying to convey three-dimensional space on a flat sheet of paper. And that's how we do it. We have a defined focal point, and then we have other things that we can't really see quite clearly, and they're in the distance. And that's when our wet on wet watercolor starts to play a role. So how do we create undefined soft shapes? We paint them wet on wet, that we, just talked about. So the plan for this painting, I hope, it starts to kind of, the logic behind it all starts to become clear. We want to paint a soft background with a hint that there are some flowers and some leaves and some branches in the distance. And then we want to paint a defined focal point. And that's the order in which we will be working. We will paint the background first and make it soft, wet on wet. We will start on wet paper, and then we will paint the focal point with more defined brush strokes, and I will show you what those brush strokes are. Now, second thing we need to think about, yes, loose watercolor is free-flowing, we let go of control, but we still need a plan. Because with watercolor, if you just try to wing it, and you will paint yourself into a corner, and we don't want that. I did that many times, believe me, and I would think I'll just start, and
I'm still doing that.
I'll just start, we'll see what happens, we'll figure it out, but then okay, this goes into the throwaway pile. So anyway, we need some sort of a plan, and then we will see how it goes. So let's talk about colors. So we want to paint the background, and then we want to paint the camellia on top of it. So if I paint the leaves, if I paint green here that I see in the reference photo, and I try to paint pink on top, so what's going to happen? Green and pink are complementary colors, so my color will neutralize, and my camellia is not going to be pink because watercolor is transparent. I can't cover that green, so I need to do something different to make it work. I can try to paint the camellia first, but then I will have to somehow carefully paint everything else around it, and I don't want to do that because I want loose watercolor. I want colors to run and mix on paper, so that doesn't work either. I mean, you can make it work, that's why we use negative painting, but not for this approach that we're talking about today. So what I can do is use a color that will work with my with everything, and that color is yellow. So if I paint the focal point and maybe even create like a diagonal with some sort of a light, maybe even lemon yellow or light yellow color, and then I'll paint everything else on the background very soft, and then I can paint camellia on top of that yellow. That will work. It will be even better because when you do yellow underpainting for outdoor subjects like that, they're in sunlight, it gives them that warmth, right? The sunlight makes everything, all the colors look warm and glowing. And yellow helps us to create that glow. So now that we understand what we're aiming for, we can start painting. So something very warm and light in the middle, then we can kind of hint at those distant leaves. And there are some darker areas here and here. And what color creates dark and distance? It's cool colors, right? So we need to switch to something cool, and that will create the illusion of three-dimensional space, of the depth of space that we want in the painting. All right, so I'm using 300-pound paper. This is quarter sheet. I'm going to pin it to my board, and Diane can tell me if there are any pressing questions that I need to answer right away.
No, just a comment. You're a great teacher. You explain everything very clearly in good order. And I'm paying attention too because I like the idea of the yellow underpainting to warm things up.
Yeah, I heard it somewhere online from landscape artist, and I was struggling with showing green. It will always come out very kind of somber and dark, but I noticed if you either add yellow to it or you put it on top of yellow, it just changes everything.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. What I forgot to do, guys, I'm going to spritz my watercolors with clean water from my spray bottle. I should have done it a little bit earlier, but it's okay.
Wake them up.
Yeah, we need to wake them up. So if you're painting with me, do the same. I try not to use, I use fresh watercolor out of the tube sometimes when I paint large. I mix it up in a cup, fresh, because I know I'm going to need a lot of paint and a lot of pigment. But usually I put it in my plastic palette, I let it dry, and then I reconstitute it, wake it up, Diane says, with some clean water. You wait just a few seconds and it's ready to paint. And we will start painting wet on wet. And painting wet on wet doesn't mean that you need puddles of water on your paper. You just need, make it slightly damp. If you're in a very cool, in very dry environment, you might want to brush on a little bit of water, and if you get puddles, pick them up with a paper towel. I'm in an air-conditioned room, so I'm just going to spray some water on paper, and that will be enough. And when I start applying colors, I will be adding them into my color, and that way I will get that wet on wet look. So, all right, let's get started. I'm going to spray my paper with water, just a little bit. Make sure it's more or less even.
But you can take a brush and brush the water on, right?
You can,
okay.
Yeah. It just will take longer to dry. And I don't want to, keep here everybody forever and ever. And I wanted to tell you guys also, the painting, I worked on this for probably an hour, not counting the drying time, but I made it pretty detailed. We will definitely paint the background and the focal point. If we don't get to other details, I'm sorry, we will do what we can today. But I think if you understand the principle, you'll be able to finish it yourself. I also did some pencil detailing. We'll touch on that hopefully today, but don't worry about rushing forward and finishing it. You will understand how to finish it. All right. All right, let's start with our lemon yellow. And like I said, we're going to paint. I have nothing drawn on paper. That's why I told you guys not to worry about transferring the drawing. If you transferred, that's fine. Don't worry about it, but just try not to pay attention to it, because we want to work very freely and, not paint within the lines. That's our main goal. So some yellow, let's see, we can maybe take it up here. There will be another branch here, and maybe take it this way. And now I want to drop in some yellow for those, some green for those distant leaves. I have to work fairly quickly, guys, because, I don't want stuff to dry, right? I want to work wet on wet. And I am looking at my reference photo, and I want my flower, I'm kind of thinking to myself, I want my flower to be somewhere here. So I don't want to put green here, like we said. We don't want to mess it up. So I want to keep this area, there will be flowers here and a flower here. So keep this area free of green for now. And maybe add some green down here. And add some green on this side. This is Viridian, by the way, but you can use any green you have. It doesn't really matter. So this is a very quick step.
Okay,
And
is this a special brush for watercolor or just a flat?
it's a flat synthetic brush. I think it did say for water media,
Okay.
but it's synthetic. And this is my purple, so I'm not mixing it, I'm just testing it to make sure I didn't pick up any crumbs. But I want to do dark and distant color here on the bottom. And you see my purple mixes with green and it creates a really beautiful mixture already. Something like this. We have purple and dark in this corner. Picking up pigment with a flat brush. Flat brush is important, picks up a lot of pigment and less water. We don't want pale, right? We want color because it will lighten when it dries. So lots of pigment. The sheet is already wet, so you don't need even more water on the brush. And another thing we can do, I think I can do it with this one. I want to leave this as white. It's lighter in the reference photo, but I want to finish this edge somehow. And the way I can do it, I can take some clean water and I can kind of vignette it out like this and just stand it this way. Or I can pick up more paint and I can splatter.
Oh, I love the splatter.
Yes, we love splatters, so we're gonna do splattering. And that kind of finishes it up, right? And transitions to white. Can do the same, maybe a few green ones. See how it floats? This is the beauty of watercolor. Do some here. Can pick up the drips if we do too much. And what I also like to do, once I applied all this, I'm holding it horizontal to prevent it from running. I have a soft, it's a dry brush, it's soft, flat brush. And you can kind of guide your pigment a little bit and don't do it like, you know, everywhere. Just guide it a little bit and close up some of those holes that you might have created, and you can maybe even do something interesting with the edge here. And just,
so that's something I've never done, is taken a dry brush and...
Yeah, you can move, if you have enough pigment, you can kind of move it around a little bit. And
oh, I can't wait to try that.
yes, Diane is stuck at the computer.
I know.
We can keep painting wet on wet. This is still wet, so I can keep adding, maybe even switch to different purple, doesn't matter. Add even more color and see how it floats, and I'm getting softness here. I'm not getting anything definitive just yet. I don't want it to be defined. So we can add more pigment here because we are thinking to ourselves, it's gonna dry and it's gonna lighten, and I'm going to have a pale painting, which I don't want. I want vibrant, I want beautiful colors. Take it down here, so okay. And maybe even a few more splatters. They kind of came out. You can even switch to brighter yellow and add it a little bit for more variety. So we're just having fun right now. It's all free. We don't have to stick to a drawing. We don't have to worry about it. And another thing I can do, this is still wet, I can even start dropping in some opera pink that I will be using for my flower and kind of give myself a head start on that. So I want that flower to be, let's say, here. I'm not going to get anything defined or anything like that, but let me switch back to my flat brush. It's not going to be defined or anything, but I can kind of already start on that pink, give myself a bit of a head start. So there will be some.
Okay, we have a question. Francesca said, some artists pencil sketch their subjects first. Is there a time and place for a sketch, or is it just personal preference?
I think it's personal preference, whatever works for you. I find that if I sketch something out, I tend to paint within the lines, and it kind of makes it more difficult for me to paint loosely. But if you feel that it will be hard for you to figure out where things are, then you can transfer the drawing first. I won't do, for something like this, you probably don't want to do, let me pick this up well. You don't want to sketch everything because this is all soft and there are no details, so you don't want pencil lines. I would sketch the focal point and then paint on top. And keep in mind that once you put watercolor on pencil, you can't erase it. So if you did this and you had to make corrections and you drew leaves, but then you changed your mind and you painted them in a different spot, you will still have all the pencil lines and you won't be able to get rid of them unless you paint dark enough to cover everything. So that's another reason I am a kind of, I think it's called additive painter, right? Some people, they have a plan, they draw it and they paint what they drew. But I kind of paint and see what happens and then I add kind of modify it. So if you that type that changes their mind and wants to see how things develop, then don't draw it first. Does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, guys, this is our first layer. We're going to leave it alone and we need to let it dry. Okay. Let me set it aside. We're good on questions, guys, right? That was
Yeah,
the
we're
only
good.
one. Okay. Everybody who is painting, are you still doing okay? Let me know. So if you...
Okay, someone asked how about using a watercolor pencil to draw the image?
That's a good option. Yeah, that will integrate the drawing into the painting a lot better. You won't have the graphite lines. That's a good option. Again, it's a matter of approach. I like to start very loosely with, I do have a plan in my head, but I'm not constrained by the drawing. Especially if you paint something, let me show you. Something like this. Some of you tried this tutorial. It's on my YouTube channel. So it was a branch with some red leaves on it, and it wasn't totally necessary to copy all the leaves, so I changed it up while I was painting. So I painted the background and I kind of marked the leaves a little bit, and they were not in the same places as in the reference photo. And then when everything dried, I added a little bit of definition in some areas, as you see. So I mean, I had a reference photo, but I wasn't kind of stuck with it. I wasn't constrained. And I think it gives you more creativity to just, paint and see what happens. Also, I think a lot of people did, I don't have it here because it's very large. I just painted the background like a meadow, and then I drew flowers with pastels on top. And, you don't need a drawing for that because it was just, watercolor wash. Similar to what we did just now. All right, do I have something else? Yeah, this one as well. So I painted the background and I kind of hinted at the leaves in some places, but again, that branch, it wasn't exactly this shape and there wasn't exactly this number of leaves. I just did what I felt was necessary for my painting, and also the way the watercolor wash worked out, right? Because you can't completely control it. That's the whole point. We let go of some of the control. So you need to work with watercolor. If you got a red spot here, but there isn't a leaf in the reference photo, why don't you paint a leaf on top of that red spot if it's already there? So that's kind of my logic behind it. All right. So hopefully, guys, you threw in some paint on paper and got something similar to this. I'm also getting some nice granulation going here. Hopefully you can see.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty.
Yeah, all the colors, those purples, they're slightly granulating, so that's another unique quality of watercolor, that texture.
So that hard line there doesn't bother you?
I think that's fine. I can work with it. If you don't want it, just take clean water. Let's soften so everybody can see. It's very easy to correct. You can rub it out and you can even connect maybe these two shapes. And I'll take my brush again and I'll soften those edges. The important thing is I'm using a dry brush. If you take a super wet brush, I might get even cauliflower here. If you bring water into wet paint, it's going to push the pigment away and the pigment is going to dry on the perimeter of that puddle of water. And that's how we get those cauliflower spots, right, on our watercolor. So it's important when you do this, when you soften edges with water, it's important to have a damp brush and not a brush dripping with water, because if you bring water here, you're going to mess it up. But if that happens, just take clean paper towel and you can even pick it up a little. Just very lightly pick it up and you'll be fine. Okay. Something else I was going to tell you. Yes, how do we know when we can proceed? Once you painted this, it needs to dry. And you probably don't want to start touching things with your fingers and leaving fingerprints.
Just walk away.
Right. The way we check our watercolor painting, if you look at it, and you can even see it in my lights, it's shiny. It immediately tells us it's wet. We don't even have to touch it. We can go by the shine. If the shine is gone, like I have in some places here, we can touch it, and when I feel it, it feels cold. That means the top layer is dry, but the fibers underneath it are still wet. And you can work on it, but you will not get the same effect as you would get on dry paper. So before you continue, you will check your painting and you will determine at what stage you are. And depending on how you want to proceed, then maybe damp will be okay, or maybe you need it to be bone dry, so it needs to feel room temperature. That would mean it's dry. All right, set it aside. How are we doing on time? I think we're okay. All right, let's move on to our next stages, to our next brush strokes. I'm looking at my notes here.
So a question here is hot press paper better for loose watercolor?
No. Best paper for loose watercolor is 300-pound cold press or rough texture. And I know, guys, the paper is expensive and the prices keep going up, and I kind of understand it because this paper is made from 100% cotton fibers. You have to grow the cotton and you have to, process it, so it's a long process. But the reason thicker paper works better is because it absorbs the paint and it has thickness to absorb that paint and water, and that creates the depth of color, so colors look brighter on thicker paper. And also you can add more layers because it's sturdier, it doesn't warp and it doesn't disintegrate, so you can keep adding color and different layers and lift color without destroying your paper. And believe me, when I started with watercolor, I thought I'm just practicing, so I bought a cheap pad of wood chip paper and everything sat on top of it. It was all warped and the colors were all dull, and I just thought, I hate this watercolor business. And I took a class and I showed up. I did buy 140-pound 300-gram paper, and I showed up for class, and the teacher said, it was Ann Abgott, you might have heard, she's a watercolor artist. She gave a live class here in Houston, and she said, you can't paint on this paper. No matter what you do, it's not going to look the same. So I bought 300-pound paper, and I was like, okay, this is different. So the colors looked bright, and I could work in layers, and it worked out. And later, I did develop techniques for 140-pound paper. You need to use a lot less water, and it's great for kind of, I don't want to say mixed media techniques, but for introducing other techniques into it, like pencils, pastels, that's fine. But if you want vibrant, complex, loose watercolor, you need to have thick paper.
Okay, another question. I just lost it here. Are there different techniques you should do at different stages of wetness?
Different stages of wetness. Wetness affects the edges. So as we talked in the beginning, we want the depth of space. So we want everything that's far away from us. We can't see the details, so we want it soft. So we want soft edges. So it needs to be painted on wet paper or on damp paper in any case. And then when we move on to details and to more defined areas of our painting, if the paper is still wet, watercolor will still go where the water is. And we will not be able, we do need defined edges here, but we will not be able to get them. And also, paper can run everywhere and mix the way you don't want it to mix. So this is what's affected. The edges, how defined or soft your shapes are, that's what affected by wetness of paper. Okay, we're good?
We're good.
Yeah, let's go forward and talk about other brush strokes that we will be using for this painting. So if my sheet of paper is dry and I want to paint on it, I can pick up paint and apply it to paper. And because I have no water except my brush is damp and I have pigment on it, and that gives me the defined shapes that I need for my painting. And if I use a different brush, I can create a different brush stroke. And if I have very, very little water and pigment, I can even do what we call dry brushing, which is a good technique, but it has its place. So different brushes create different brush strokes. If I switch to a flat brush and I continue painting with that, I can get a certain definition. So this is called painting wet on dry, right? My brush is wet, but my paper is dry, and watercolor is not going anywhere. It doesn't mix, it stays where we put it. It doesn't mean that we can't make it go where we want it to go. I'll show you in just a second. And it doesn't mean that we can't use wet on wet technique on a small scale. And that's another beautiful thing about watercolor, because if I take a different color and I drop it in here, because this is still wet, I am getting a certain amount of mixing going on in there. So painting wet on wet doesn't have to be the whole sheet of paper, right? We can do it on a smaller scale, on smaller shapes. So keep that in mind. And also, if we applied a defined brush stroke, but we need to maybe transition to the background, or we changed our mind and we decided that's too much detail, it's very easy, right? What we can do is we add water and it starts to float. And we can change the shape of that brush stroke and soften. That's what we call soften the edge, right? So I got rid of that hard edge that I had on that side very easily with just some clean water. And we can also keep doing this and kind of lifting paint and adding more and more water until we get to basically white paper. So our brush strokes can be two types. They can be all defined edges, or they can have some defined edges and some soft edges. And any artist will tell you that painting is all about edges, right? It is composition and color palette, it's all important, but in every painting you need to have soft and hard edges, no matter which medium you use. Oil painters, everybody do that. You need to be aware what those edges, what effect they create. Soft edges, usually it's less detail, things move away from us, we can't see the details, things become blurry, they're kind of in the distance. If the edges are defined, things start moving towards us and they become focal point. If you have hard edges everywhere, your painting will look flat, right? It will be, that's what illustrators do. They only use hard edges, everything is on a flat surface, and it's not a realistic approach, right? Because in real life, we see the world in 3 dimensions, so there is always certain distance between us and different objects. And some people say, I posted that a painting and somebody said this is not loose watercolor. And to me, loose watercolor is not when everything is soft and flowing down the page. I think even loose watercolor has to have both. It has to have soft, undefined areas kind of floating, but it also has to have a focal point, because otherwise how people will understand what your painting is about, right? So you need to have a center, a focal point, and to create that center you need to have defined hard edges. So that's what I'm telling myself when I paint. So that's my understanding.
So what brushes do you recommend, and what colors and brands?
The thing with brushes, I can't really recommend a certain brand. These are called Polar Flow. I found them on Amazon. They were like $15 for 3 brushes, and they work great. They're synthetics. I have these also. They're Roll Majestic. They're also synthetics, and they were a little stiff at first, but I got used to them and they work just fine. I don't think it's the brand matters so much. I think you need to have certain shapes. And that reminds me too, I wanted to tell you guys, flat brushes will always pick up more pigment than water. They don't hold a lot of water. So if I want to paint something in the background, I already spritzed that with water, and I'm picking up a lot of paint mixed with water, and I want intense color. So that's why I'm painting with flat brushes in the background. Then when I start working on smaller areas, I need more precision and I'll need different shapes. So then I switch to round brushes. And also it's a good idea when you paint, especially when you do defined brush strokes like hard edges, I try to pick the shape and the size of the brush to correspond with the brush stroke that I want to leave. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I want to paint a petal, let's say, it's much easier for me to have a decent sized brush. This is number 10. And then I can paint my leaf or whatever I need to paint. I can drag paint a little bit to a certain extent, but what I'm trying to show you is that I take, let's see, I see artists sometimes do that. They take a tiny little brush and then they start doing this, trying to paint something. First of all, this brush doesn't hold nearly enough paint and water to paint a shape this size. Then this is what you're getting. You're putting in a lot of effort to do something when you don't have to. So you get stripy look. We say watercolor looks dry, right? So because you didn't have enough pigment and water on the brush, you have to make the huge effort to paint something, and then the shape becomes all kind of stripy and ragged, because this brush, just by its shape, it created these edges that look really nice. But it's very hard to do if your brush is too small. So always paint with the biggest brush you can get away with, right? That's the principle. Alrighty. So this is our wet on dry, right? I always have to think about it a little bit. So these brush strokes we will be using for the focal point. And let's look at our background. It's damp, but I think I can get away with it. You all guys saw I know a lot of people downloaded that brushstroke guide. So if you haven't and you want it, yeah, Diane will post the link. I think I can put it here. You can just also go to my website and check out the classes that I teach, because if you're a little bit unsure about materials and what colors to buy and what colors do you need, I have a 7-hour beginner watercolorist class. It's on demand. You can watch it whenever you want. It's called From Zero to Watercolor Hero. And I explain the whole process from the beginning, from the materials, all the brush strokes, how to paint the background, how to paint white, and it's all uses flowers as examples. So if you're interested, but don't rush and buy it yet, because if you downloaded the brushstroke guide, I have your contact information and I will send everybody coupons, so you don't have to pay full price. You will get a really good discount on that. All right, so yeah, and Diane is posting the link to the brushstroke guide. And there are other classes as well. I paint with different water media, so there is a class on gouache, on combining watercolor with gouache, that I think is a lot of fun. Makes our life a lot easier as watercolor artists. I have a class on painting animals. I'm reworking that one, by the way. It will be expanded. So don't buy anything yet. I will be in touch with some good offers for you. All right, so let me clean up here a little bit. I should have brought another.
You need something?
Can you change my water, Diane? It's right here. Thank you so much. So nice to have Diane here. It makes my life so much easier. All right. Let's talk about our focal point and how we're going to proceed. Thank you so much. I sent you all an outline, right? To help out those who are struggling with painting a little bit. And you see I only drew the focal point, right? Because I didn't want you to get bogged down by all the details and start painting every brush and every branch and every leaf. So what can we do if we didn't draw anything? We just have this free-flowing background. What can we do to transfer this? What I usually do is I take this. It would be nice to have something to protect your desk, because I would take a piece of charcoal, or you can just use like really soft graphite, maybe 12B or something like that, and I would rub it on the back side of this paper. And this is printed the same size that I'm painting on, right? It needs to be 1-to-1 scale, obviously. Then I will put it on my painting, and I will use the back side of my brush, and I will just transfer, kind of run along the lines and transfer the drawing onto my watercolor paper. And that way you don't get all those extra lines. You can take your pencil and kind of, verify the lines a little bit afterwards, but you already have a guideline how to proceed. So this is how I usually transfer my drawings onto watercolor paper when I don't want to, draw and have a bunch of lines. Some people buy transfer paper. I'm sure Amazon and everybody has it. You have to be careful because if it's just regular transfer paper, it will have wax in it and the lines will become resistant to watercolor, so they will stand out. There is special tracing paper, but each sheet you can only use a certain number of times. You run out of the pigment of that graphite on the back side and you have to throw it away. And this way you never run out.
Does the charcoal make the painting muddy?
Well, don't, rub on it everywhere. Be careful. You will have the lines, but watercolor will wash them away. That's why I go over with graphite usually one more time if I need precision. I go over with my pencil very lightly, but watercolor will wash off graphite, and you can even blow on it and it will fly away because it's so light. So it shouldn't really affect your watercolor. And the lines will be fairly faint. So this is how I transfer. But I also think with flowers, what if one petal is not in the right place, or it's slightly larger, slightly smaller? It's no big deal, right? It's not like a portrait where you have to have everything in the right place. So don't obsess about it and just, practice drawing. Just draw something on your page. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's see. So we will have... This will be my center here somewhere. And we will have... How are the people doing who are painting? You're all doing okay? Let us know. So there will be petal here somewhere. So you see I'm working with my background, right? So I created that pink blob here, so I'm not trying to force my flower to be somewhere in a different spot, right? I'm working with what I already have. That's why I said it's really not important how big or small is your flower and where it is. Just make sure your overall composition works, and that's it, Petal here, there will be one here, the one that I wiped out, and something here. And this one kind of sticks up a little bit, so something like this. And there will be a branch, and the leaves will be here, and there will be some more leaves here in the shadow, and there will be there is a leaf here and some leaves on this side. So there will be this branch up here, and this distant flowers, that's a little high. I think I usually try not to rub my watercolor paper with an eraser. If you do, make sure it's clean, and erasers are easy to clean. Just rub it on a wood surface and it will take off the graphite. Make sure it's clean, and you can, when it's on top of watercolor, it's easy to erase it. Or you can use this dry cleaning pad. You can get it in art supply stores. It's full of rubber shavings, so you kind of massage it a little bit and it can lightly pick up the graphite without damaging the paper. So I want to end this somewhere here.
What pencil are you using?
Is
it a 2B?
It's probably 2B. Yeah, you don't want it super soft because it will be too dark, but you don't want like HB because it will press, grooves, leave grooves in the paper. So 2B, 4B, that's fine. Okay, so we'll have some leaves here. And this we can all develop a little better as we go.
Okay, Margaret's asking, why didn't you use a hairdryer to make it dry faster?
I don't want to make a racket.
You don't want the noise.
Right. And, I don't really use hairdryer that much. I feel that once you painted a layer, it requires so much concentration, and then you want to walk away from it and kind of forget what you were doing and give yourself a break. I just feel it helps me to paint better because I rest and I do something else, and then you come back and you know it's dry and you look at it with fresh eyes. So that's why I don't rush it through. Okay. So let's work on our Camellia. So in this blob, in all our blobs, we need to find the flower. And we will go to our Opera Pink and just start painting. And like I said, because the paper is dry, the paint doesn't go anywhere anymore. And we can work on the petals. I'm using, you know, fairly big brush, that number 10 that I showed you before. And I'm creating hard edges, but I'm also softening them I'm using that last trick that I showed you, that last approach, right? I'm softening some of the edges to make my colors lighter and to make them blend together.
What is a good substitution for Viridian?
You know, the thing with Viridian is it's pretty unique pigment because it's one of the few transparent greens. That's why I added to my palette. I used to use Cascade Green, which is a cool green, and Sap Green, which is a warm green, but they're semi-transparent. And Viridian is a cool green that's transparent. That's why I feel it's necessary for the palette. If you can find a cool, just look at the description. If you can find a cool transparent green, then go for it. You know, it will be good substitution. But unfortunately, I can't recommend the name. This petal is basically painted, right, at the early stage. So all I need to do is just define the edge a little bit and paint the shadow. And this one is in pretty good shape. I'm going to just define the bottom edge of it. So don't fight your watercolor, work with it and see what you already have and what you need to add. And so if this is this petal, make this a little bit larger, this will be the center. And there will be petal behind. And like I said, feel free to adjust stuff the way you need it. You don't want it to be, you know, tight and kind of forced. You want it to be very watercolory. Okay, so we painted this. Our Camellia, we can add the center with yellow. And notice that the base of those stamen, it's light, so don't put too much pigment there. We already have yellow on the page, so you don't want to over darken it. You want to darken the areas around it. And see how my paint's starting to run? Because, you know, it's wet in there, but it's very easy to just pick it up. And we can spread this down a little bit. And now, without dilly-dallying, let's paint the shadows. We want them somewhat defined, but we don't want them super sharp. So I'm going to use a warm red. This is Scarlet Lake by Holbein, but you don't have to use it, just a warm red color that you have. And I'm going to drop in some pigment here to create the shadows under the petals. And there is a shadow at the base of this one, and this shadow here. This is all very wet, so I might not be able to do that shadow just yet, but I can always come back to it. Let's switch. What other color we can use? Let's just use primary red. This is Sennelier Red. Variety is really good, so we can use different colors that we have. And there is a shadow on this bottom petal which looks very purple, so let's pick up maybe I'm not going to go into my purples. I'm going to switch to maybe cobalt blue. Creates beautiful purple with pink, but just use the colors that you have, don't worry about it. Okay, so this is my Camellia basically. Can adjust a little bit. And it looks pretty amorphous. I mean, I have some hard edges, but you can always let this dry and go back and add even more precision. Like the shadows, they're all very soft, but this petal, let me show you on this. So this is pretty defined and the shadow has a defined edge. So to do this, right, we're asking ourselves the question, what do I need to do to create defined edges? I need dry paper. So I need to wait and work over this one more time. And I'll show you in a minute what I sometimes do to create defined edges as well. All right, let's work on the leaves, I think. Yeah, we need to keep moving.
Do you ever paint with India ink?
Yes, I use not India ink. I use a traditional Chinese ink. Hi Pei Hong, thank you for showing me this. I love traditional Chinese painting and calligraphy and things like that. I have some Asian art brushes. So you can, if you learn this technique, it will improve your brush control. So that's why I took those classes. And Pei Hong can put a link in the chat box to her website. She's a great teacher and she teaches traditional Chinese art, and I highly recommend everybody taking those classes, not to, you know, paint maybe that style. You don't have to if it's not something you want to do, but to improve your brush control. So I paint with watercolor and then I define my painting a little bit with traditional Chinese ink. So I love that technique. I don't have those angles. Okay, let's move on to our leaves. And again, it will be defined brush strokes, right? This branch is close to us, so we're just going to paint the leaves very easily with our Sap Green. We can mix in some yellow into it to lighten it, you know, if you want to. You don't want them all exactly the same color, right? So we can modify the color a little bit. And I noticed, guys, the vein on the leaf is usually lighter in the light. It's lighter than the leaf itself. So I kind of like to leave maybe the center empty to create that vein, so it's not a solid shape. And again, we need the right size brush and the right shape brush for the job. It will be very hard for me to paint something like this with a flat brush, right? Because I'm creating those pointy shapes. So I need a brush that creates those shapes. And when we come close to our Camellia, if this is wet, and you touch it, all your green is going to go where the water is, so don't touch it. Just stop it short, and you can always make adjustments later. And this is not diluted pigment, right? I picked up some and I kind of mixed it on the palette with just tiny amount of water, but also if you have more water than pigment, this is not going to work because I'm painting on top of color already. I need sufficient saturation to make it work. Okay, we can use other greens. I have some Cascade Green. This is a cooler green. Some leaves are in the distance, so they will be cooler, right? That's how we create distance. Some leaves have shadows on them, so we can drop in different colors. And there is a leaf behind there, but I'm careful to stay away from my Camellia. And if you do get some paint run in there, just pick it up with a paper towel and let it dry and repaint it. Okay, let's see what else we want to do here. There's a leaf in the shadow here. These are all connected, so this will be the stem. I'll show you how to paint the stem, guys. Don't paint it yet. Is everyone being quiet and painting, I guess? Nobody's commenting. And bottom leaves are getting larger, so I'm even going to switch to a larger brush. This is number 14. So I think I need, you know, a little more freedom. Don't paint with a tiny brush, because that's how you lose that loose approach to watercolor.
And that's my problem, is if I look at a reference photo and I see 25 leaves, I'm going to want to paint 25 leaves.
And I mean, you can, but just ask yourself, why am I doing it?
Exactly.
Do I want the viewers to see everything? Is it important maybe to show every single one of them, or maybe it's not? So we need to make that decision.
I like more spontaneous painting.
Right. Okay, there are some leaves here. And see how my pink ran over, but it's very easy to cover it with darker, cooler colors. I get that interesting kind of transition. So it all works to our advantage. When we were splattering that paint, we knew what we were doing, because we knew we can use it all later in our painting. And there will be something here. And again, we can maybe even just...
Okay, question, how can you tell between a cool and warm when it's the same color, for example, green?
Right. Let me show you. I'll put this vertically so it doesn't float. So the green is not one color, right? It's a range of colors. And if you look at the pigment, I have them arranged kind of per color wheel. So these are my blues, and then some greens, they will look more like they will have blue undertones. So if you look at it, so like turquoise and phthalo green and cascade green and viridian is on the edge, right? They all look closer to blue. But if I look at sap green, and even if I mix it with yellow to get like lighter green color, see how it's starting to approach yellow? So if you see those yellow undertones, it means it's a warm green. So that's what we're talking about. So this is Undersea Green that Daniel Smith tells us this is a true secondary color. So it's exactly in between warm greens and cool greens. But everything else will be kind of spread on the color wheel. So that's how we know. And that applies to all the colors. So warm red, if it looks more like yellow and orange, it's warm red. If it starts looking kind of purplish, like maroon and colors like that, and it approaches purple, the secondary purple, the true purple, then it's warmer, it's cool red, right? So every color has that range. Okay, let's continue. I want to show you softening, guys. So I put a bunch of brush strokes here and they're all defined. See how they kind of flowed into each other, so I get that nice color variation, but I feel it distracts from my Camellia, from my focal point, because this is all that bottom corner. This is not defined, right? So what can I do? I just take my brush, I take clean water, and I can run it through without dropping water in there, right? Just a damp brush, and I can soften it, and I can make that edge disappear. And see how it all kind of come down and went into the distance. I wanted to show you how to paint this stem. We're getting closer to the end of our broadcast, but we need to paint some stems. We need to have the brush for the job. For branches and leaves too, I like to use a dagger brush. You see the shape, it's angled and it's also flat, so it gives me a lot of variety. I showed it the last time we did the broadcast when we did another painting. I still use it for almost every painting. So this is my Undersea Green, so it's kind of neutral green, right? It's in between all the warm and cool colors. And if I pick it up with my flat angled brush, I want a lot of pigment, right? Don't dilute it with water or anything, because I want those branches to be very dark. If you look at the reference photo, see how dark they are? You can almost, they almost disappear in the shadows. So my goal is in one pass to paint them dark enough. I don't want to go 10 times over the same spot. So I pick up a lot of pigment and I turn my dagger brush on the edge and I paint the stems. And also try not to kind of go over the same spot 10 times. You will disturb the paint layer first of all, and you won't be able to maybe hit the same spot exactly, so it will be kind of hairy line. Just put the brush down and drag it and paint the branch.
One stroke.
Yeah, just be decisive and stick to your stick to your decision.
So question, if Undersea Green is your neutral green, what is your neutral yellow and red?
I'm using Daniel Smith, so they tell me that let me see, oh, there they are. So these are their basic palette. So the primaries are French ultramarine, which I don't know why they put it in there. I think ultramarine blue is truer primary blue, but they think French ultramarine is the true blue. They also have Hansa yellow medium, and they have Perylene red, so that's their primary red. And the secondary colors are Carbazole violet, Undersea green, and quinacridone burnt orange. And what that means, it means that if you mix these three colors and these three colors, you will get a true black. So that's how they determine which one's a primary or which one's a secondary. Because, every color has a million variations, but they need to neutralize each other. So that's how they pick that set. So Hansa yellow medium is the primary yellow. But with other manufacturers, they might tell you something different. So usually their website will have that information. And that's one of the reasons I like Daniel Smith. I know there are a lot of professional grade paints, but they have really good information on their website about all their products. So adding darks to my leaves and trying to make them interesting. And I don't like this. I'm going to just lift it and blend the colors together. So adding darkest darks and hopefully in one go. So stuff dries, so it's becoming easier and easier for me to work and to find all those, defined details. Maybe some little branches sticking out. Might be something dark here. So you see my painting is starting to take shape. The flower is coming to life. We can keep working on it. We can do something. I'll just show you real quick. Up here, we can slightly increase the saturation in these flowers, but we don't want them to compete with this one, right? So just do a little bit and maybe add some green here to again hint at the leaves and all that stuff.
So like in the photograph, you're just blurring that background.
Right, yeah, that's my guideline. And see, I got hard edges here. I don't want them here because they compete with my flowers. So I'll just take my flat brush, make sure it's clean, and you can scrub it out. And that's another reason I'm using that thick paper. And you soften
Yeah,
it.
the thick paper can take a lot of abuse.
Yes, and sometimes we have to abuse it a little bit. Okay, so we created a soft background and we created the focal point. And of course, you know, if we had time, we will keep working on it. I would pick up more color and I will define the edge here more and create that shadow. There's a shadow between these petals, kind of separate the petals more and just keep developing that painting. Or maybe separate these so they don't blend together so much. There's a shadow here.
What pink did you use?
This is Winsor & Newton's Opera Pink.
Ah,
Yeah, it's very bright.
yeah.
I had I used Sennelier. I think it's called Opera Rose.
Opera Rose,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's got a lot of blue in it. It's not as electric as this. And again, if I need to soften, I can go in and soften that edge. All right, I wanted to show you one more thing, guys. We have 10 minutes left. To add more definition to my painting and to make my life as watercolor artist a little bit easier, I use color pencils. And it is not mixed media approach. I don't make them stand out or anything like that. I kind of draw with them in a way that enhances my watercolor painting, but they don't compete with watercolor. So I have a set here. I'll just show you one thing real quick. With color pencils, it's important because you can't mix them very easily like watercolors. You can have 6 colors and paint whatever you want, right? With color pencils, you kind of have to have the colors to match what you have on the paper. So I found this 36 color Prismacolor set. They say soft core. I think that's important because then they don't scratch your paper. They kind of blend really easy. And you kind of need 36 color set at least to make it work. And what I do with them, let's see, the problem is they break. And so you have to, here's my white. You see how short it is because I constantly use it. So I did a little too much here, and they're not going to go on wet paper. But if your paper is dry, I think I have a little dry spot here, you can kind of lighten certain areas and add a little more definition to your painting. And add maybe, yeah, mine is still wet. But you can add a little definition and those tiny little details that will be very hard to paint with a brush. You obviously don't want to redraw everything, you know, but small corrections like this are easy to do. And yesterday I discovered another great material. This is Diane's, she let me borrow it. Faber-Castell makes, they're called Pit Pastel pencils, and those things are nice. They're very soft, so they're much easier to use than regular color pencils. So it's pastel, but it's in a pencil form. I use a lot of pastel in combination with watercolor, but those chalks are thick, so if you have fairly small painting like this one, they will be hard to use. So with these, it's a lot easier. So you get like veins on the leaves. Oops, everything's wet. So. We can add those veins and do like small details with them and have a little more, add a little more definition. see if I can do it with this one. Yeah. So we can add
Oh,
some
wow.
details.
That's like magic. I'm going to take the pencils home. You can't borrow them.
Diane is going away with her pencil. So yeah, we can add a little more details, and I don't think it looks like mixed media. I think if you don't overdo it, just do it in a few spots. And also, if you have some blending tool, I bought this, but you can make this out of a piece of paper, just make a little tube. And if we have a little blending tool, we can also blend them, and they will become even less visible. They will kind of blend with watercolor. So just little detail work goes a long way with putting finishing touches on our painting. I think I need a darker one. Let's see this one. So I can define the edges of the petals a little bit better. And, if I need to add something, let's try the white if it will work better. Yeah, like I said, it's not going to work on wet paper, so you need to wait for things to dry completely, and then you can work with this. We can add something here, some details, and they will not really be, obvious that you added something with a different material. All right, can even switch to something, do a little bit of blending, like switch to purple and like do this shadow with some purple. Maybe add something here. There's a shadow here. And especially in the distance, like there is a branch there in the distance, it will be hard to kind of paint all this with watercolor. So if we just hint, that there is something there with these pencils.
Joanne said this would make a great Mother's Day card. It really would.
Oh yeah, Mother's Day is coming up soon. Yeah. And then we blend it so it doesn't stand out. So you guys have the reference photo and you know what to do now. So just feel free to play with it and paint it on different formats, and it will make a great gift, I'm sure.
Okay, Claudia asked if you could zoom in on it a little bit so she can see some of the details a little bit better.
Oh, sure. Let me show you closer. So this is what I have so far. So this needs more white. I might actually use some white ink so you can see the final result a little better. So this needs more white, and we can add more precision to the petals, or we can leave it like this, whatever you prefer. And we can, of course, we can work on these leaves a lot more if we want to. We can do maybe something a little bit here, but the main thing, it's loose watercolor. We don't want to overdo it, so we don't want to overwork it. And we always do a little more splattering. We'll kind of bring it more to life. And if your splatters come out super defined like this and they start to contradict with the rest of your painting, all you need to do is take a spray bottle and aim it away, obviously, from your flower, and just spritz it, and you can soften your splatters and get a little more,
oh wow,
sunshine and kind of distant something in your painting. You can add more green if you want. But
so Anne's asking, how do you seal your paintings? With any kind of spray?
I don't. I just frame them under plexiglass.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just get UV protectant glass. Okay, can I just do the opaque white? It bothers me. So I have Paige Martin's Pen White ink. It's opaque ink. It looks great with watercolor. I highly recommend it, guys. I'm gonna grab a small brush. And you will just see it makes a big difference. So add a little bit of, bring back that white on the bottom, and there are some highlights on the stamen, and maybe put a highlight. Yeah, here on the petals, don't overdo it, but they are, this one in front, it's the coming towards us, so it needs to be defined a little better. And maybe this one.
Oh wow, that just does it.
Yeah, it just makes all the difference. That's why I wanted to show you all. And it's lighter here. And ink can go both on dry paper or on wet paper, and you will get different results, because on wet paper it will blend with watercolor, and on dry paper it will of course stand out. So okay, that brought it to life for sure. Okay, so we can see the result kind of side by side, the one that I worked on for longer. Put this here. I'm starting to get a lot of stuff here on the desk. So these are the two side by side. So this is a quick demo, but I hope you now understand the principle. I created the background that I painted very loosely, and my goal was to paint this camellia. This was my focal point, so I gave it a lot of definition. I painted a lot of details. I added highlights and details with pencils and with white ink. So I'm hoping the viewer's eye goes to this focal point, and then it kind of starts moving around my painting, and my painting has depth and visual interest. And loose watercolor, it's not just something about, art about nothing. It has to have soft areas, and it has to have defined areas, and the balance between the two is up to you as an artist, right? You can keep working on this, for many more hours. This is more developed version, and this is a quick kind of more sketchy version, but they both have their place, and they both can be beautiful, and it's your decision what you want to do. So you know the process now, right? So you know what to do. All right. Again, my contact information, my website, my social media, you all know where to find Diane. She's always in the group, spending a lot of time helping everybody. If you feel that event brought you any special value, we'll appreciate some tips at this link. Very easy to do. Every dollar makes a difference, helps with art materials and with all the expenses associated with the group. Thank you all so much, guys. I think we're good to go, right?
No, thank you so much.
No question.
Lots of great comments for you.
Okay.
I hope you have a chance to read them later.
Yeah, I'm going to watch the recording and read the comments, and the recording will be available on YouTube, and also it will be available in the group, but it will be also available on YouTube, so you can use closed captioning and use different speeds if you need to.
Lots of thank yous here. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you later. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again, and stay creative.